No, it's not your fault. It's my fault. So that means I don't have any audio on that first part. So welcome to all you YouTube listeners who didn't hear any audio. We're talking about why did Jesus come into the world. So anyway, I started going out to the prison here with this man named Merlin Booty, and he would pick me up in his car and take me out there. And his personality type was just the opposite of me. I am, I guess if you want to, I would diagnose myself as an introvert. I'm a sort of, I can sit and be quiet, and I'm happy to do that. And Merlin was just the opposite. He was an extrovert, and he wanted everybody to know what he thought at all times. And he was not shy about it either. And so I guess it was a good combination. I'm quiet and he's loud. So anyway, and he was not afraid to speak his mind. And so here's why I'm telling you that. When we go there, we have these little ID badges that we wear. And it used to be you clip them on your pocket or on your lapel. And or wear it around your neck, like what I prefer to do on a little lanyard. Anyway, so he would pick me up in his car and we'd go out there and do our thing, and he'd take me home. And so one night he picked me up. He said, "Let me tell you what happened last week after I let you off." I said, "Okay." And he said, "I went out to this convenience store before I drove home to get a drink and a little Coke or something, and the lady behind the counter saw that badge on my shirt. I forgot to take it off, and she said, 'What's that badge?' And he said, 'Well, that's my volunteer badge because I volunteer at BJCC, the prison here, and we go and have a little Bible study there.'" And he said, when he said that, he told me, this lady behind the counter got all huffy-like and kind of puffed up and said, "Well," she said, it kind of like it irritated her, what he said. He said, "Oh, I'll tell you one thing, they're just getting what they deserve." And now, if that were me, I would have just shrugged and gone on. But no, he wanted everybody to know what he thought. And so when she said, "They're just getting what they deserve," he said, "Well, I hope you don't get what you deserve," which is kind of funny, but it makes a good point, you see. And the reason I like to tell that is that's how I think even if we don't express it, that's how a lot of people think that you could say it this way: I'm not perfect, but at least I'm not as bad as whoever. As long as we can point to somebody worse than us, we feel like we're okay. But you see, from God's point of view, He doesn't see it that way. He doesn't grade on a curve. He doesn't say, "Well, as long as you're better than that person over there." Jesus gave a parable one time. He said, two men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee. Those were people who regarded themselves as holy. And the other was a publican. These were people who were notable sinners. And so Jesus said these two men went to the temple to pray, and the Pharisee said, "I thank thee, O God, that I am not as other men." See? Like that man over there. You see, Jesus held that up as the way not to be. And he told all of his good works, and then he told all the things that he didn't do. And then the publican, who was in that society, a person who was known as a notable sinner, he didn't commend himself at all, because in his mind he had nothing to commend about himself. Jesus said he did not even lift up his eyes, but said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." And Jesus said, this man, not the other, went home with God's approval. The man who had nothing to commend himself. And so we see that in this verse, Paul making the same point. It said Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners, but he doesn't say like those people, like those other people. He says me. You see, he includes himself. Now, this is King James English, and we would never say, "Of whom I am chief," as it says in King James. And in a way, that's such a fluffy way of talking. It sort of masks the bluntness of what he's really saying. Let me read it to you from a couple of other translations. This is from the easy-to-read version. It goes like this. Here is a true statement that should be accepted without question. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and I'm the worst of them. Well, that kind of makes the point. Contemporary English says, I'm the biggest sinner of all. He's saying, I am not better than anybody else. And in fact, I might as well just consider myself worse than everybody else. Because Jesus did not come, well, listen to this. Guess what, I think it's interesting to consider what he didn't say. Here's what he didn't say. Here's a faithful saying, worthy of all acceptation. Jesus came into the world to tell us what we should do to get God's approval. You notice he didn't say that, but I think that's how a lot of people think of it. He also didn't say this. Jesus Christ came into the world to live an exemplary life that is a good example to follow. Did you notice that? He didn't say that. Instead, he said, Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners, and I'm the chief of them. Now, the reason he didn't say he came to teach us all what we're supposed to do or to show us what we're supposed to do, because in the bottom line then, whether he came to teach us what to do or to show us what to do, in the end, it's we who must do to get God's approval. And that's not the message of Christianity. That's not the message of the gospel, that we should do something to gain God's approval, or that we should do something to maintain God's approval. And in fact, this guy that's writing, the Apostle Paul, goes out of his way to say what you do has no bearing on it at all. In fact, if we would consider the word save in this verse, that's exactly what is implied. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief. Now, I'm not an English teacher, and that's my wife. She's an English teacher, and so I'm kind of hesitant to talk about grammar, but I do observe this, that in this verse, if we were to diagram it, the sinners of whom I am chief is not the one acting. The only one acting here is Jesus Christ. And his action was to come into the world to save sinners. And we, you see, Paul has included himself, and that's why I say we. And he's advising, you see, by saying this is a faithful saying worthy of all acceptation, he's saying we should adopt this same attitude. Sinners, of whom we are included, are those who are acted upon. Now, let me just delve into this just a little deeper so you get a more clear understanding. We're reading from an English translation, obviously. The English language was not around 2,000 years ago when this was written. The language of intellectual discourse in which the New Testament is written was the Greek language in the then Roman Empire. And so there are study books that you can get, like the Strong's Concordance, for instance, is the most famous one, and it lists every single English word that's in the King James Bible and tells you what the Greek word is from which it is translated, and helpfully gives you a definition of that word in the Greek language so that you can look it up for yourself. And it's very enlightening to do that, because frequently the Greek words from which a single English word is chosen, this is how the King James translation works. You choose a single English word, but that single English word may not necessarily convey the depth or the subtlety of meaning that is in the original word. And to top it all off, we've had 2,000 years of church definition imposed upon, church understanding, religious understanding. And so when we read the word save, it conjures up some kind of a impression in our minds, related to what we imagine some kind of religious connotation or something of that kind. But let's just, without going into all the ways we conjure up that meaning, let me just read to you what it means in the Greek language. I'm going to read, the word is sozo, S-O-Z-O, that's translated save, and it is a verb. And here's what it means: to rescue from danger or destruction, and furthermore, to keep safe and sound. Now, there is a related word, that's a verb, sozo, that's used here. The related word is translated salvation, and that's a noun. But they come from the same root word, and so they mean essentially the same thing. The noun version, which is translated salvation, is soteria. It comes from the same root as sozo. And it means, and I'm quoting now from Strong's Concordance, which is the source of my information. It means deliverance, but then it means also preservation and safety. These words mean exactly the same thing, but let me say it this way. Sozo, as a verb that's translated here, means the action of saving, of rescuing, of preserving, keeping safe and sound. Soteria, the noun, means the result or the state of having been acted upon in that way, a condition of safety and preservation. Now, I read all that to you, and I hope you didn't find that too boring, too much like a classroom. I wanted you to understand that in the church world, we don't necessarily understand it that way. You know, when we read the word save, we have this sort of churchy definition, and we might imagine like a fly-by-night preacher come to town and set up a tent outside of town and get people to come to the tent and then make everybody feel bad, and then say, but here, come up to the front of the church and play some soft music, and you'll get saved. And what they really mean by that is you will have an emotional experience. And what in the church world, the understanding of save means that here's what I thought, until I began to investigate for myself. The impression I had of Christianity and what it meant to be saved was God gives you a second chance. And that's what I heard people say. I heard preachers say that God will give you a second chance. Well, that's all well and good, but the truth of the matter, the fact of the matter is, number one, you need more than a second chance. I'm just trying to be honest here. You need more than a second chance. And number two, that implies that you are going to do something. In other words, I'll give you a second chance. Go and see if you can do any better. And that puts the burden back on you. Second thing is, you need something better than chance. God's not dealing in chances here. And so I read that definition to you so that you understand that it's not a matter of God gives you a second chance, now go and see if you can do better. See, the question that should arise in your mind is, well, what if I don't? Well, see, that's the truth of the entire human condition, If it was up to us, then we wouldn't have this, it wouldn't say this. See, if it were up to us, either initially or later on, Paul would not have said, here's a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptation. Jesus came to do this. He would have said, you must do this. Or he would say, Jesus will come and give you a second chance. Now straighten up and fly right. But that ain't going to, I almost am tempted to lapse into my Oklahoma talk. That ain't going to cut it, is what I was going to say. That's how we talk in Oklahoma. I'm sorry, that probably just offends you from California, that kind of talk. Yeah. A lot of us Okies went to California, during, some of my relatives did that during the Dust Bowl. A lot of good stories. And I'm thinking back, I wish they'd stayed there so I would have been born in California, but I shouldn't say that. Oklahoma's, is just fine. Anyway, that ain't going to cut it. That's what I started to say. That ain't going to cut it. It's not up to you to initiate it, but it's also not up to you. Wait, hold on. Let me just read this again. Saved or salvation, either way, it means number one, rescue. That's not something you do. But number two, preservation. That means kept in that state. And number three, safe. Do you know what safe means? See, that's safe is just like the word save, isn't it? It's a very similar kind of word, safe, save. I like to think of it this way. The way we understand, the best way to understand what safe means is think of a baseball game. The batter hits the ball and goes flying out there somewhere, and the other team grabs the ball, and he starts running. The batter then drops the bat and starts running around the bases. Now, I know I'm telling you something that you already know, but just think about it for a minute. While he's running around the bases, he's in a state of jeopardy because the other team has got the ball and they're trying to tag him out. And if he's out, he's out. He goes to the dugout, right? So he's trying to avoid that. He's in a state of jeopardy. So while he's running the bases, he's in jeopardy. But if he gets all the way around and he slides into home, the ump goes like that, right? And you know what he says? He says, safe. And he just shouts it out, safe. What does that mean? That means he's no longer in jeopardy. He is safe. Now, what we think in our Christian minds, which are not informed by what Paul had to say, but just by church tradition or what we've kind of heard by osmosis, what we think is, if I can just make it into heaven, then I'll be safe. But that's not the way Paul presents it. Let me tell you another story. Again, I'm emboldened to tell my stories for you guys that are not here every week because you maybe haven't heard them all. Everybody else has heard all my stories, so I'm reluctant to tell them. But, anytime you have a church, they're the regulars, the people who come all the time and you know them and you get to know their names and, and their lives, and their circumstances. But then sometimes newcomers will come and just, somebody you don't know, a visitor. And so for them, you don't, if they just come once or twice, you don't really get to know much about them. And so we, time to time have some people who just come check it out, and that's okay. And so there's a couple that came like that, and they came 2 or 3 times, and I guess it wasn't to their liking. That's fine, it's free country, everybody go where you want. It's like a restaurant, everybody doesn't go to the same restaurant, and it's okay, it doesn't bother me. But anyway, this couple came a few times, and I didn't really know much about them. I kind of knew their face, recognized them. And anyway, so some time passed, and one of them, I don't remember now which, called me on the phone, and they said, and again, I don't remember which it is, one of their mothers, was diagnosed with a terminal diagnosis from a doctor, and they were very concerned, and they asked if I would come and pray with her. And I said, sure, I guess. I'll do that. But I was kind of, hesitant because I didn't know her. I barely knew them. So I came to the house, and here she was. They introduced me. And so before I prayed with her, I wanted to kind of get a little bit of information because that's going to inform how I'm going to pray. And so I asked her, are you a Christian? Thinking she would either say yes or no. And if she says yes, then I can pray one way. I mean, I can say, well, you got nothing to worry about, However things turn out, you got nothing to be afraid of, nothing to worry about, and we can talk like that, and I can be comforting and encouraging. But if she says no, I ask, are you a Christian? If she says no, then we need to talk about that. That's the first thing. You see why I ask that. I just want to inform myself before I pray. And so I expected her to say yes or no. I said, are you a Christian? But she didn't say yes or no. She said, I've been in church all my life. Well, can you understand that doesn't answer the question? Because you can be in church and not be a Christian. That doesn't speak to, who you are and what you believe or what your convictions are. Like I heard somebody say, I thought this was funny, so I borrowed it, and then I say it all the time too. Sitting in church doesn't make you a Christian any more than sitting in the garage makes you a car. Where you sit is not the issue, right? And that's funny, and that makes a good point. And so I said, are you a Christian? She said, I've been in church all my life. And while I'm pondering how to answer that, she said something more. Now listen to this now. She said, I just hope I've done enough good things so that I can make it in. Now I knew what she meant. She meant, the doctor said you're going to die soon, so she said she's fearful she might not make it into heaven, So she's saying, I just hope I've done enough good things so that I can make it in. And then, that's a way of saying, then I'll be safe, you see. Now, number one, the way the Apostle Paul presents what he calls the gospel has nothing to do with you doing enough good things so you can make it in. In fact, just the opposite. Torrin, could you just briefly, I'm going to come back to this, but Torrin, could you put up Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 just for a second? I'll just refer to this. This is a really important verse, I would say foundational in terms of understanding, because it tells you everything you need to know about God and everything you need to know about you and your response. And this is the verse from which I got this banner back here. It says, by grace through faith. So Ephesians 2:8 says, for by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. And the next verse, in verse 9, says, not of works, lest any man should boast. Now going back to verse 8, it says, by grace, grace is a Greek word, charis, which means gift. By God's gift you are what? Saved. That's the exact same word that we've been talking about, sozo. By God's gift you are, well, what does the word mean? The word, I just quoted it to you a while ago, it has a three-part definition. It means, first of all, rescued. Rescued from what, by the way? Rescued from what? Well, in our baseball game analogy we were talking about, while the runner was going around the bases before he is in that state of where the ump says safe, he's in jeopardy. He's in jeopardy. He's in an uncertain condition. That's what the rescue is from, a state of jeopardy or an uncertain condition where God is concerned. It has a three-part definition. It means, first of all, rescue. Second of all, it means preservation. What does preservation mean? It means kept in that state. When we talk about, people who are concerned about the wilderness and, the state parks reflect this idea. We call that preservation. We want to preserve it in its natural condition, its natural state. Keep it that way, in other words. So it means rescued first, and then kept that way. See, this is the part that doesn't always come through in our church experience. See, what we think, what this woman, I think the reason I tell that story is it's revealing what people say, because what people say reflects what they think. And when she said, I just hope I've done enough good things so that I could make it in, number one, she feels like she's still running around the bases and she's still in jeopardy. You see, she hadn't made it yet. She's not safe yet. And then second thing is, she's got the idea that to be that way, she is going to have to do something, or her doing of something has have to be evaluated. You notice that in this verse here, go back to verse 8 for a second, Torrin. It says, for by grace are ye... Well, what are we? By God's gift. Grace means gift. By God's gift. And even if you didn't know what a Greek word meant for grace, he says it right here. It is the gift of God. Isn't that what it says? It doesn't say it's the reward of God. It doesn't say it's the payment of God for having done enough good things. In fact, he excludes that understanding because he says that not of yourselves. That means it's not about you. It's not about you. So what is not about you? And what is by God's gift? First of all, rescue. Second of all, kept that way. Third of all, safe. And notice that, again, I'm not an English teacher, and I don't want to get all hung up on grammar. But see, when I see the word A-R-E-R, to me, I read that as present tense. I don't know how you read it. What I don't read is you might be in the future, or there's a possibility you could be. R means right now. You see, what Paul presents in his gospel is that right now we are in that state of safety, and we are preserved that way, kept that way. By who? Well, Torrin, let's go back just for a second to my opening verse in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15. We're talking about why did Jesus come into the world? Of course, at Christmas time, we focus on the birth. But why? Well, it's because Jesus came into the world to do something. And notice, it doesn't say, 1 Timothy 1:15, doesn't say he came to tell us what to do, because then it would be up to us. It doesn't say he came to give a good... Now, granted, his teaching is important. Jesus' teaching is all aimed at convincing or, leading his listeners to believe in him or to trust in him. Jesus came into the world to save sinners. He came to do that, not to instruct them how they can save themselves, to rescue and to preserve and to keep in that condition. And then Paul says, I'm the chief one. Now, so how did he do that? Torrin, I brought an art image to show you today. And Torrin, can you put that up for me? Do you remember where that is? I have this painting here. This is a painting painted in the Renaissance period. This is, let me see, I wrote this down here. I had to look this up. This painting is called The Adoration of the Magi. It's by a man named Roger van der Weyden, painted in 1455. And, this is a traditional nativity scene. And you see the wise men are there presenting their gifts to Jesus. And if you look at this very carefully, though, is kind of an odd thing, If you look very carefully, right up here above Mary's head, I don't know if you can see it there, there's a crucifix hanging on the wall in the manger. Now that's a kind of an odd thing. I saw, where I first what brought this to my attention was I saw this on the internet. Somebody drew a little circle around that crucifix and wrote "spoiler alert." Well, and you might say to yourself, well, this painter, he made a mistake, or he just got carried away, or no, this was on purpose. This was deliberate. He deliberately put that in there to suggest that the reason for Jesus coming into the world was something he would do at the very end of his ministry. And by the way, the wise men, as we called them, the Magi, that means magicians. These were astrologers who came from Babylon, and based on prophecy about the coming of a Savior into the world, a king, they brought gifts. And, Matthew tells us that what their gifts are. The gifts were gold, and you might know this from, Christmas things. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, gold is something you would present to a king, and that is symbolic of Christ. Frankincense is something you would use in a temple or in a worship situation, a priest. You might give that to a priest. It's incense, as the name implies. The last one, though, myrrh, what's that? Well, you can look it up. All these things you can find out. Myrrh is what was used by the Egyptians in embalming. Now, that's a funny gift to bring. It also, it did smell good, but the reason it smelled good, it was meant to mask the odor of a decaying body. And so it was used by its main association was with death, or with, funeral, kind of association. And why is this crucifix hanging on the wall? Well, the painter is suggesting to us the fact of the matter that what Jesus came primarily to do was to do something that was accomplished by his, and no other way, by the way, could be accomplished no other way. Why? Then here's the next question. Why didn't Jesus just come? Why did he have to go through all that suffering and death? Why didn't he just come floating down from heaven on a cloud and say, you people just need to straighten up and just try a little harder and just, get it together, people, and then just go float back to heaven? Or why didn't he just go through all the things we read in the gospel and then just get on a cloud and float away to heaven? Why was the death necessary? Well, there's a good succinct way to explain that. And Torrin, if you would just briefly, and I'm trying to wrap this up, so don't get nervous. Torrin, Would you put up Romans chapter 6, verse, let me see what verse, 23. Romans 6:23, I think is what it is. This is, yeah, and you can take the painting down now if you can find that other background. We've seen the Renaissance painting enough. Okay, there's our cloud there. Paul the Apostle wrote this. Remember, he's the one who's presenting the gospel that we've been looking at his writings. Paul the Apostle says, the wages of sin is death. Now, I sometimes take a little survey, especially at my prison services. I sometimes ask, how many of you have ever heard the wages of sin is death? And you know what happens whenever I ask that? Every single hand goes up. Everybody's heard that. Everybody knows that. And maybe we know that instinctively. What it means is, when you say the wages of sin is death, that means that the due penalty, or that which is earned by, what is, sin is such an ugly word, but do you remember that's what Paul said when he said, this is a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptation. Jesus came to save sinners, and I am chief. He labeled himself with that ugly word. I am chief. And so if I identify myself as, and see, he's saying everybody else should accept this saying too. So if we identify ourselves as sinners, that means we are liable to receive, and we should receive, the just penalty for it is death. Now notice he doesn't define what sin is, because you can't really do that. Sin just means to miss the mark or to fall short. What it means is, unless you're as holy as God, then you fall short, And then you don't even have to get into the details. The details don't even matter. Unless you're as perfect as God, then you fall short. And so we're all guilty, That's what Paul is saying when he says he came to save sinners. We're all in a state of jeopardy, you see. And he says the wages, what we deserve, in other words, what we deserve if we're going to, if we've done enough good things to make it in, that's out of the question, And the way preachers treat a verse like this is, the wages of sin is death, so quit, don't sin anymore. Well, that horse has already left the barn, if you understand that expression. That's pointless, Preachers like to say these pointless things, That has nothing to do with it. That's, sin, and I don't want to offend anyone. It's such an ugly word. I hate to use that word, but, it's part of the human condition. That's just what it means to be human. It is a condition of being human. And it doesn't matter if you're a Christian sitting in church or a non-Christian not sitting in church. It's part of the human condition. But the good news is, listen, you see the word but there after the semicolon? The wages of sin is death. That's not the end of the statement. You see the word but. And why do we use the word but when we're talking about in this context? I have to clarify that. What does it mean? It means I'm about to say something that is going to cast what I just said in a new light, possibly even contradict what I said. The wages of sin is death is not the truth. It's not the whole truth. It's a lead up to the truth. It's a premise for the truth. The wages of sin is death, but the gift. Do you notice that? Again, contrast wage with gift. Wage is what you deserve. Gift is what's given to you, free of charge. When we are presented with God and His attitude toward us as human beings in the New Testament, it's always in the context of gift. The gift of God is eternal life not through you're doing enough good things so you can earn it, through Jesus Christ our Lord. How is the eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord? In other words, what we're asking is, when Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and that's me, I'm guilty, I can't fix it. He is the one who comes and rescues and preserves and keeps in that condition. I got one more verse, well, maybe not quite one more. I got another verse to read. It's in Hebrews chapter, I wrote it down here, chapter 2, verse 9. Let's just look at this for a second. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9. What he said, when we see Paul writes, in long sentences. Every verse has a furthermore or because or but. So what he said in the previous verse is, he quotes from the Psalms, where the psalmist said, man has been given dominion over all the works of his hands. And he says, but we don't really see that right now. That's what he's saying. But we do see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor. Listen to this, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. Let me read you that from another translation. This is the Voice translation. I really like this one. But what we do see is Jesus, born a little lower than the heavenly messengers, now crowned with glory and honor, because he willingly suffered and died, and he did that so that through God's grace he might taste death on behalf of everyone. Well, what does that mean? That means that death as the wages of sin, that's true, but what you got to include is the death has already been died. The wage has already been paid. The debt is paid. And when a debt is paid, I don't know if you've ever had this experience at the bank, if you have a loan and you have maybe on your car or something, or your house or whatever, and you have to make these payments, continually making payments, make payments. You go down to the bank, make your payment. But what if you went to the bank to make your payment and the banker said, a benefactor has come and paid your debt for you? You know what they do then when the debt is paid? I don't know if they actually take a rubber stamp anymore, but paid in full is what you do. And you fold it up and they put it away, and it's no longer a factor, you see. And if you keep going in there trying to make payments after it's already paid, they're going to say, you got a screw loose? Did you hear what I said? It's already done. It's already paid for. What this is saying is death as the wages of sin. You see, this is why Jesus had to come into the world, number one, and why there had to be a death involved, because it wasn't going to be good enough for him to come and say, here's what you need to do, because we couldn't do it. If we could, he could have stayed home. He came to clear the deck, to take away the jeopardy, and what's our part in this? Well, we just have one little part. Let's go back to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8, and then I'm going to try to wrap it up. I make all these really careful notes and then I don't follow them. But that's okay, we'll be fine. This is it, so I'm trying to wrap it up. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. For by grace, remember that's God's gift, are ye saved. Again, I wish we could just erase all of our associations with this word. Anything we've ever heard in church. Think about it this way. Rescued, preserved, and safe. Kept in that condition. Rescued, preserved, safe. You are, by God's gift, in that condition. And notice the next two words, through faith. That means, you see, this is our part. Our part is purely a response. It's like when someone offers you a gift. How do you respond? Well, you could sit there and cross your arms and say, I'm not taking your gift. No, but you see, a positive response is say, yeah, okay, good enough for me. I accept that. You don't have to come to the front of the church. You don't have to go to a tent. You don't have to have quiet music. All you have to say is, yeah, okay, good enough I accept that. That's what faith is. Let me just say it another way. In the Greek language, when it talks about to believe or to have faith, same word, same family of words, to believe or to have faith, it means something more than what we imagine in our understanding of the English word believe or have faith. What we think is to believe or to have faith means that you accept a certain intellectual premise. In other words, if I say, I believe the earth is rotating around the sun, it's just I'm accepting an intellectual premise. But in the Greek language, this is something you find out by looking up these words. The word believe or to have faith means something more than that. It means to, like you might lean on something or put your weight on something. For instance, let me see if I can give you a demonstration here. See this big wooden pulpit here? Right now I'm standing on my own 2 feet. You all see it? I'm standing on my own 2 legs. But right now, I don't know how this is going to look on the video. I'm leaning on the I almost knocked it over. I'm leaning on the pulpit, see? I'm putting all my weight on this pulpit. I got a choice. I can either stand on my own 2 feet or I can put my weight. That's what it means to believe, to put your weight or to lean on something other than yourself. That's our part. To say, not to say, I hope I've done enough good things so I can make it in, but to say, I'm not trusting myself at all. Instead of trusting me, I'm trusting Him. He came into the world to rescue and to keep in that condition. He came to put me in the condition where the ump says safe. And so I say to myself, yes, good enough for me. I accept that. Now I'm going to, in my thinking and in my understanding, lean on and put my trust in Him, Jesus, the one who came to do that very thing. And now the deal is done. Now the ump says safe. And sure, yeah, when we get to the end of our lives, yeah, when your body can't contain your spirit anymore, when it's worn out and, whatever. Yes, that's if what we call death. Yeah, you go to heaven. Everybody does. All Christians do. Everyone who, there's no question about it. There's no doubt about it. There's no question about it. But for the here and now, you're still in that condition. The reason you go to heaven when you die is because you're already in that condition right now. You're already safe. The ump has already said safe. And so we're already in that condition. By grace, you're safe in that condition through faith. That's our part. That's just a positive response. And not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that's all good news. I think that qualifies as something good. Okay, I think that's all we got today. Do we have, thank you, Torrin, for managing all those things. I'd make it harder and harder for Torrin.